Hi Janaki, hi Kirva. Good evening.
Hi,
Hello,
Sneha.
Sneha. Good evening.
So was there any questions or clarifications on yesterday's topic, like on the instance creation for the wrapper classes?
So I didn't get the concept immutable.
Okay, yeah, we'll see that today.
Okay. And hash code, I was looking up in Google. So hash code function just gets the hash code of the parameter pass. Like if you pass an
Yeah,
string
exactly.
hello.
So the hash code will be always returns an integer value, but initially you will not get an idea about a memory address. So that is the reason we use the hash code to understand it. But the actual memory address can be witnessed through one of the packages which is available in Java. But in the initial stage, we wanted to understand like how the memory address is getting created for each instance, right? That is the reason we use the hash code as a reference for your memory address. That is what even I was
Okay.
saying today. It's not actual value, it's not actual memory address, but it's just only a reference for you to understand how the in which place this particular object is getting hold. That's it. Just a reference value. So not actual value. To check the actual value, there are multiple ways, like there are third-party APIs. Like right now we are using Sun JDK, right? We have something called Open JDK. And in that JDK, we have a certain dependencies to experiment the JVM related features, like what is the object size, what would be the object location, what would be this. I was about to discuss that today also. So that can be experimented through OpenJDK. Or there's also one more way where you from the Sun. So earlier it was developed from the Sun. So the Sun package has provided few of the interfaces where you can actually go ahead and check the object size and then see the location also.
Okay.
But to come to that place and do those things, you need to have a better idea on few other concepts also, like complete exception handling. If you're done, we can experiment that. So, but right now it's just only the hash code is just basically to understand what would be the value and how we can differentiate the object references.
Okay. So in Google, I found this way to get the memory address. I just pinged it in the group chat.
Yeah. But this VM is something you can get it from the third-party OpenJDK API.
Okay.
So
This
instead
was
of
not there for
going
me,
with
but
the OpenJDK, you have something called, just a moment, I was actually experimenting with instrument. Java Lang has something called instrumentation. And within that instrumentation, you have a member called get object size. And from there, you can experiment it. But for that, you have to explicitly invoke the agent. You have to create the variables, which I haven't covered it, like how we can increase the memory size, right? Those things I haven't covered because right now we didn't start using the editor yet. So once we use that, how to increase the memory variables, and once you get a better idea, then we can experiment those things. That is the reason I didn't start up with that.
okay.
Maybe in
And one
another
more
5 to
request.
7 classes, you will get an idea of it. Yeah, Kirpa, tell me.
Yeah. So for this one, like every day you are recording the video, right? So can you make it available for all of us whenever we need to recall something or revisit something that happened last class? It would be better if you could share the video as well. Because if you see in Drive after December 10th, I don't see any study material for Core Java. So in case of any doubts or if you want to recall whatever happened the previous class, like
Okay,
there is
sure.
no way
Yeah,
as
I'll
of
do
now.
that. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Like what is that joining or not? Let's wait for a minute. If not, we'll start. Okay, can someone share me the screen? So meanwhile, we'll experiment one more way how we can get the inputs on runtime. So the earlier we experimented using scanner class where we can get the dynamic values, right? So otherwise we'll be hard coding the inputs through our variables. But there is also a way, like if you wanted to give the input on runtime instead of using scanner class, there's one way called command line arguments. So in your main method, you have something called string array of arguments, right? So those values can be passed on runtime, and based on that, we can evaluate our results. So that is also one way to get the inputs dynamically. But that is not a preferable one, but still we can get those inputs on runtime. So we can experiment that as of now, and post that we'll go ahead with the object instance and wrapper classes concept. So like who is okay to share the screen? Kiriba, Janaki.
I will share screen.
Okay, yeah.
But you can't take control. Like last time you were trying to take control, right? I think it won't work.
Okay, no issues. You can do that. It is like just an additional knowledge, like how we can get the inputs on runtime. Yeah,
Yeah.
like instead of executing through editor, we'll try through a normal flow, like how we did in command prompt, and then we can do it in the editor, so that you can get a better idea on that aspect.
Okay. Yeah, I've opened the text editor.
Yeah, so just can you have your normal class template structure?
Try setting
Command
on it.
line. You can just have command CMD line command line.
Okay. Will we have a driver class or same class would be fine?
No, normal one class should be fine. Yeah. Just static void main. String array of arguments. Array of arguments. Yeah, anyway, it should be fine. And in that, just have a sysout statement and print args of 0. And without quotes, args of value index 0. Yeah, save it and compile. And now, while executing, just give usual Java command line. Yeah. No, don't give anything, just enter. So you got an array index out of bound because in your sysout, we were printing the first index value, but you haven't passed anything in your execution, right? So how we can actually pass that is after your class name, you can give your input. Yeah, you can give anything and now try to execute, you'll get your array. So even if you now pass more than that, give one more string. Yeah. It will not throw you any error because we haven't defined any specific index in our main method. So it will accept any number of input, but the one which we are printing is only index 0. So through this way also, we can actually execute our program. So when do we go for this scenario is, if you're having any specific script files, right? So specifically to your local system, or you have to execute an ad hoc request, something you get on ad hoc and you have to execute such request. And in that case, you want to pass some inputs and you have to execute, say, for example, in production, when your application is live and your bank transaction didn't actually get updated in the database. But you have to do it immediately in that flow because that will impact the customers as well as the bank. What we'll do is immediately, if we have identified this issue, what we do is immediately we'll connect to the respective production server. And in that server, we'll write a Java program. And there we execute this ad hoc request. So whenever we have some fallouts or any kind of issues which have to be covered up immediately on that particular time frame, we create such programs. And there, if we are in requirement to pass the data dynamically, then we go ahead with this structure. So, but the best practice is always go with scanner. Or there's also one more way which we'll be learning in few other classes on the NIO package, like how you can actually use your streams like buffer reader, file stream. So where you can read your text from your text files. But apart from that, if you want to get it executed through specific inputs, then you can actually say, example, for this particular account, I have to make an credited amount or make an say like the whatever transactions happen today, I have to retrieve. So such kind of transaction activities which I need to do ahead, I can just go ahead with this particular command line program. So we'll try one more thing, like whenever you wanted to do your for loop.
So
instead of
the command to get input is that arg0, right? That only is between
yeah. So arguments is the command. So where you're actually passing the inputs or everything consumed through your array.
array. Okay.
So this is the way you can consume. So if you're getting some kind of, like, for example, for iteration, if you're doing some iteration like I equal to 10 or I equal to 20, and where you have to get the input from user, in that case, you can retrieve it from the arguments and you can use that as an input and create your for loop also. So what I suggest is you can try one program instead of getting it from scanner, you can get it from your command line and see how that is working. So this is one of the way which we didn't execute earlier. So this is one way where you can get your data dynamically, and this will be mostly used in real time for ad hoc purposes. So any questions here? Maybe within the same thing, what we can do is we'll try one more scenario. Like in sysout, can we have one for loop, Kirba, and instead of defining a static value, get your args length. No, normal iteration like int or x equal to 0, and make it x less than args dot length. So this is one of the certification question. So we'll see the positive and the negative flow, and you guys can tell me what is the problem in that particular line. And just print the respective values. Save it. No, the length is just an attribute, not a method. So you can remove this braces. Yeah. Okay. Now try to give some input along with your thing. Okay, we have two sysouts, so that is the reason we got printed twice. Now in the X argument, right, we can give one more, or like you can try with multiple possibilities. So you still get executed that. Now instead of X less than, can we give X less than or equal to, Kirpa? Yeah. And can you compile? No, compile it. Your latest code is not yet compiled. Okay. So what is the issue we got here?
Array index out of.
Why did we get? We passed only one index, but what is the issue over the query in the for loop which we have pasted or which we are altered right now?
Yeah, so length is 1, index is 0 only. So args of 1 we are not passing. So this will return 1. The argument
so
we are
when
passing
the first
will be
time
stored in
execution
args of
is
0.
happening, you'll have your X as 0 and X less than or equal to 1 condition true. and x plus plus, it will happen only post your execution does. So when you're going to print x args of 0, I should have the value of 5, right? But x plus plus is happening there. So when it is getting incremented, when again I'm validating the condition, my actual value will again check like 1 is less than or equal to 1. But my actual input which I have passed is only one input, which has only an index 0, right? So in this scenario, whenever you're trying to pass more than the indexed value you're trying to push, you'll always get an array index out of bound exception. And that is the reason whenever you're using the array concept or any string concept where your index starts with 0, it's always better to maintain a condition like less than, or instead of if you're using the array length, always make it +1 or -1. Such kind of scenarios can work. But less than or equal to will fail when you're trying to do that, because your index value is always starts with 0.
Okay.
Okay. So this is one of an certification question. So make sure like you practice this with different possibilities.
But length will be only 1, you are saying. So it occupies 0th position. So that's why we are getting.
Yeah, length is 1, but the position is at 0, right?
Okay.
You can try different possibilities. So even if you, this was the same scenario when Divya was facing that loop also. So this is the same scenario. So you can try with some different possibilities like that. Right now we have trying with less than. You can try with greater than, and by instead of plus plus, you can try with decrement operator, so that you'll get to know what is actually happening when your index is more than what you have defined. So, and every time there's no need that your condition has to be like this, x less than and x plus plus. Based on your scenario, you might have it greater than, and you can decrement it, right? So try to write few more logical programs where your for loop logic can help you to improve more on the logical side. So if you don't have any questions, we can go ahead with the wrapper classes. Are we good here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Like you already know, like your object gets stored in heap, right? So you never knew what would be your object size. So we didn't experiment that yet. So we'll do that after a few classes. But right now I'll just give you a theoretical explanation how actually your object size gets created, what are the basic factors we will consider when your object is getting created. And we'll see about a design pattern called singleton design pattern. And there are multiple ways to implement it. So we'll see what is actually singleton pattern, why do we need to have that pattern, what is the advantage, and what was the problem behind that, and how that helps us in our wrapper classes. So if you get that base, it will be easy for you to understand your wrapper class concept. So let me share my screen, Kirba. So post that we can work on your screen.
I have stopped sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Sneha, this wrapper class is also like inbuilt a class, like which is already available in our LAN package. Actually.
Yeah. So all your primitive types have the relevant classes in java.lang, and we are just using it based on the scenario. So let me make it more precise of why we need wrapper classes, and you'll get to understand the usage of that when it comes to your programming practice. So, you know, there are two types we can store our data, whatever you create in your program. One is your stack, another one is your heap, right? So why we go for stack and why do we go for heap? Any one point you guys remember? Can someone say?
Heap is dynamically we can store.
Yeah, so we create in the heap, the dynamic allocation happens. Okay, and in stack, it is a continuous location. Okay, but which is faster? Stack is faster or heap is faster? When you retrieve some data, which is faster? To get a variable value is faster, or to get an object value is faster?
Object value.
How?
A random guess.
Okay, so basically, the stack holds all your variables and references, right? But the actual object is present in your heap. So what happens is all your variables doesn't have huge value. It is basically a predefined memory for all your primitive types or any kind of variables. It is like somewhat a predefined memory is already been created for it. So you know this is the place and that is what the reference you maintain in your stack. It goes to some memory and gets your data. So the retrieval happens very faster in case of stack, whereas the retrieval is very slow in case of heap. Okay. So it is very slower, but the main advantage is like you can store any amount of data in that heap, but the retrieval is very slow comparative to stack. So that is the reason like all your static methods and everything will not have it in a heap memory, we'll have it in a stack memory. Okay, so the second thing, how is your heap memory is actually internally structured? We have seen JVM architecture, right? In the middle layer, where you see the method area, we have seen about stack memory, and then the respective native functions method. We have seen a middle layer, right? So in that layer, it is actually classified into 3 ways. Like whenever you create an object, right now we didn't come up into the explicit algorithms which we can implement through Java, like your arrays. Just now we saw arrays, but not in depth. There's list, there are maps, so there are trees. So there are multiple data structures available for us and how we can implement that. So the heap considers the first aspect as data structures or algorithms. So that will be the first data structure concept which we'll consider. The second thing it will consider is your methods. How have you created the method function calls or your whether it's a static method or it's an object method, it's an instance method, what type of method is this? So all these calls, like how many times you're invoking that method, is it an overloader, is it an overridden method, everything based on that object it will consider. The third aspect is your threads. So whenever you're creating an object, for each object, you have a thread created explicitly by your JVM or by through your heap memory. So how should I maintain that thread? So what is a thread? So can someone say what is a thread? In your concept, whatever you knew. Or if you don't know also, I can tell that. If you have any idea, you can tell.
Unknown error or something.
Come again?
Unknown error or something.
Okay. So right now, if you see in my desktop, I see a notepad got opened, Chrome, Postman, and Zoom, like multiple things are operated, right? This is all operating on top of my CPU, right? The processor is taking care of it, right? So what is actually doing? It is helping me to open multiple applications at a time, right? So where I'm able to perform, I'm able to go to the notepad and do something. Same way, if I wanted to open one more thing as a paint, I can go and open and do it, right? Who is actually in the background helping us to do all these tasks? So for all these tasks, we have something called thread. So it is basically like they are allocating this particular thread. So basically like instead of resource, we can say it's a resource. So this resource should take care of notepad. This resource should take care of my IntelliJ. This resource should take care of my Zoom. So I'm allocating some kind of resources backend, and that will handle all the application related issues or whatever I'm trying to do on that part. It will be taken care. And everything, the control of all these applications, whatever I'm doing right now is being notified by your task manager, where you can see like, okay, this many number of applications are getting executed right now. This is what the processor is working on. And if you see, if I just open any of the task manager, so you can see like how many processes are getting in the background, like what is the memory allocation. So everything you are able to observe, right? So each process is something like where your thread comes into your picture. So for each application which you're trying to execute, there's a background, a thread is being running. And that is what in Java, in JVM as well, we have something called threads. So we use this threads as a resource which can help you to use those resources on runtime whenever your JVM instance is getting created. So for your object, whenever you're creating an object, these 3 factors are considered. Okay. And why do we need to consider and how exactly the heap memory stores this data? So in your heap, they are further classified into 2 things like young and old. Okay. So there are 2 spaces in your memory allocation. So they are young and old. Why do we need an young and why do we need an old? So the naming itself will help you. Like whenever you're creating an object, say student S1 equal to new student. You haven't used it. This is freshly created object. Then it will fall into my young flow. So S1 is in the young. Now, when I'm having one more object, say wrapper class, which I created yesterday, right? And in the wrapper classes class. So I have created an object called wrapper classes that is not recently created. It has been created a day ago. So what happens, since it is old object, which has been used multiple times, that memory will be stored, that reference would be stored in the old space. So how exactly this separation happens and why do we need to separate this way? We have something called garbage collector. So you remember this term, garbage collector. So what is the purpose of garbage collector?
Free up some memory space.
Yeah. So we know that a heap helps you to retrieve your object data, but it is pretty slower. So when you're creating n number of objects and you're dumping on top of your heap memory, it can't maintain that and it will not be able to retrieve your data whenever you're invoking it. So for that purpose, internally, the heap has an algorithm or a strategy where it separates your objects based on young space and old space, where all recently created will be in young and all the old created ones will be on top of your old space. Okay. And the second thing, why do we need to do? What is the purpose behind of categorizing this into young and old is the garbage collector helps you to clean out your memory, like those objects which are not used for a long time, it will flush out those memory. And explicitly, if you wanted to create clean that memory, there are also possibilities from our developers who can write a piece of code to delete the object's memory. But internally, the garbage collector has its own functionality to clean out the objects which are not used for a longer time. To figure out which objects are not used for a longer time, heap is actually helping out that the objects which are in the old are older. Please check first that whether they are actually used or not, and post that come to my young space which are recently created, and later then you can use your garbage collector functionality on top of my young space. So that is the reason heap memory is internally classified into these two sectors. Okay, so the other thing, like right now I'm creating an object, say student S1 equal to new student. This happened, but what would be the memory size? So if it's an int, I know that it will hold only 2 bytes or 4 bytes, right? If it's going for float, I know it will hold 4 bytes. If it will go for double, I know it holds only 8 bytes. So for these, I know these are the memory sizes. But what happens? What is this S1 size, memory size? How do I know what would be the size of my S1? So there is also a way in JVM where this memory size of each object can be identified through various factors. Okay. The first one, so is your JVM version. So what kind of JVM is being internally maintained? The second thing is your heap size. So for internally, every JVM will have a heap size maintained. So it will also depends on the heap size, whether it's 512 MB or 1024 MB, or you're having 2048 MB, whatever it is. Based on that heap size also, it will internally create your object size. The third one would be the garbage collector strategies. So there is something called mark and sweep strategy, which is being followed by your garbage collector, which is happening in your JVM. So we'll understand this once we learn how to do your garbage collection by our code. Then we'll get an idea on this mark and sweep algorithm. But right now, just know about this algorithm name. So there's one thing called garbage collector strategy. And the final factor which helps you to define is your platform, that is your OS, which helps you to identify like, how should I create, what should the size of my each object should be. So for example, there are two sections. Your object can be classified as small versus large objects. Okay. So how do I know small versus large objects? So all the small objects will be in the range of 2 kilobytes to 128 kilobytes. Anything which is greater than or beyond that will fall into your large object sectors. So this size will be calculated based on these factors, and which gets varied if you are using Oracle JVM or if you're using OpenJDK JVM, what type of JVM you are actually internally using, it gets varied for each thing. And to determine the object size, there's also a way to determine that, which can be experimented maybe post 5 to 6 classes. Once you're pretty good on exception handling and few of your interface and inheritance concepts and few packages, then we'll experiment this one, how to check the size. So far, we don't need to worry about how to determine it, but this is the way you have your object size determined through your JVM heap size. So till now, any questions here? If not, let me go into the actual design pattern, which I'm about to start now. So we have something called design patterns. Okay. So what is design pattern? Can someone frame it from that particular collocation? Design patterns. Okay. So there's a person or there's a pattern name called Gang of Four. Okay, so they actually created some patterns for all the major problems which are actually faced in our software development. So those problems are like those problems have been rectified with some solutions, and that helps in evaluating in your object-oriented programming development practices. So these are the best practices to be incorporated when you're starting your coding. And what is this Gang of Four? How many design patterns are actually present? So there are 23 design patterns, and they are actually classified into 3 sections. One is creational design pattern. The second one is structural. The third one is behavior. So all your objects, so these all are dependent on your object-oriented paradigm. And if you're going for creational, so how do you create your object? This is the structure you create your object. So if you have new keyword, you can able to create an object and you can use it and you can invoke whatever properties that object or class allows you to access. But this is not a right way in all the cases, right? So there might be restrictions like I'm a very private person. I'm an introvert person. I don't want to share my data to anyone unless I give an explicit privilege. Okay, she is my close friend, so I can give a privilege to her to know about my details. Unless then I won't give it. There are few people called extrovert who will give access to everyone and everyone can know anything. There are few people called ambivert. They are like very introvert to few people, and they can also socialize to some extent, right? So that particular kind of people will not give the object creation to everyone. So they say like, okay, I have like 100 bunch of people, but in that only 10 people I can trust. So I can give only 10 members an access of object creation. Whereas to 90 members, I'm very private. Whereas an extrovert, 100 members, I'm always public. In case of your introvert, it's like only for one person I'll be able to create an object, not for everyone. So there are ways or categories you can create your object. So how can I create that object? What is the purpose of it? So instead of whenever you're creating an object, your JVM instance gets created, right? So whenever your class is created, in background, an imaginary JVM will start running, and that will help you to execute your entire program and creates your instances, heap memory, and everything, all stuff. So instead of every time creating one imaginary system behind running for n number of people, I'm restricting it. Like if you want, you can have a lazy initialization. Like there are two terms which we predominantly use going forward: lazy initialization versus eager initialization. So what is the difference? It's like I'm very lazy. So what I'll do is I don't want to wait for someone to come and ask me and then get your object created. Every time I say come and get your object created. That's it. I'm very lazy. So I do it in the first go itself. Your object gets created if you use new keyword. I don't want to give any extra attributes. There, some of you eagerly initiated. So eagerly is like they wait, like who is going to request my object access? Only then I'll create an object. Till then I won't create an object. So on purpose, on request only I'll create an object, right? So for that purpose, what I do is I go with the eager initialization. So how can I differentiate them? For that purpose, so can someone say what is happening here? Which type of function is getting called behind to create your object? Is your method or constructor or default constructor? What is behind it's getting called?
Constructor, default
constructor, right? So which is like basically in your public class, and it has default privileges, like basically more than private access, more than protected access. So not public, but it has more privilege comparative to other two, private and protected, right? So in this creational pattern, we say there are multiple patterns: singleton pattern, factory pattern, abstract factory pattern, builder pattern. So there are multiple ways. Okay, so these are the ways you can create your object. So what I'm trying to do is now we don't need to go into the other actions. So right now we'll just understand what these two comes into. What is the main purpose of this? The singleton will tell, right, I'll create only one object, that too either by using your private constructor. So my constructor, I'm making the privilege as private so that no one can have the access, so that they can't go and create this new keyword and use this constructor and get your object created. So I'm making my constructor as private, and your object created can be happen either through your static block or static method. Okay. So in this way, I can give you, so whoever access this static method. So what is a static method? You don't need to create an object. You just need to call that static block with the class reference. So if your class is student dot object, student dot get object, any kind of name. So only when I invoke that, I'll be able to get an object created as S1. Unless then I'll not be able to create an object. So I'm restricting my object creation pattern with this few criteria. So my constructor is always private, and I can create an object through my static block or a method. What is factory pattern? So we know, like we saw an example called shape, and where we had like multiple shapes, right? So every time when particular shape is coming into picture, I'm creating the respective color method or some kind of shape filling color methods, where based on the shape type, I'm filling the respective color based on that type. So in factory pattern, what I'll do is I'll use the concept called interface as well as my inheritance, and make my object creation easy to all my sub and super classes. Okay, so that whoever wants to create an object for circle C equal to new circle, I won't allow like that. If you even give me shape S equal to new circle, I'm okay. If you just pass me the instance type, I can check on the using instance of keyword and then create your object. So basically your object gets created on runtime by not in the default way, which you have to create your object and then pass me. So this is the way your factory pattern works. So we'll see how this factory pattern works little later. But till now, any questions on these two? Like and understanding the concept, why we have these design patterns, what are the types of design patterns, and these two singleton factory falls into your creational, where you're actually giving the privilege to create an object to access your classes. And that is where this falls in. So if you don't have any query, we'll try the singleton and factory pattern right now in the second invite. So any questions so far? Like how your object gets created, why are we going with the singleton instead of making it every time public access to all your objects? Why are we going with the singleton pattern? So there are multiple ways to create it. Right now with the concepts you have learned, I'm just giving you the basic criteria which we need to create a singleton object. So if you learn threads, if you learn multi-threading concept, and if you learn more about that, you can also go ahead and create your singleton object using those patterns, those keys also, keywords or those concepts. But right now the concept which you have learned is static block, static instance method, and then the private constructor, which we never tried so far. So these things we can experiment now.
You mean like usually we will create one object, right, which we'll use to invoke all the methods and other things actually.
Yeah.
But these ways of creating objects will be restricted only to these parameters. Like we could able to access only static block, something like that.
No. So like if you have a class, say example class student, and my class is public, right? So wherever I want to create an object in my main method, I'll just go give student s equal to new and student. That's it. This is the way to create an object by default. So because your class is public and you're giving an access, whoever access it with new keyword. But right now what I'm saying is, though you have a default constructor within this class or not, whenever you create this object, your constructor gets invoked and your object gets created. But I don't want this to happen every time. I want to restrict it. Whoever wants to create student object, they wanted to create only once through one static method where they will have created using this new keyword stu. So what happens is stu will happen within some static block. Okay. And this static block will be accessible only if this constructor is private. If it is public, they can actually call stu dot this method, right? This particular block. If they call it, it will have already invoked my object. But I want to make my constructor private so that they'll not be able to access it. So the object creation and the invocation, I'm making a little tight and creating more privacy to that particular object creation. And that can be handled whenever you wanted to make your data more confidential. We'll experiment that right now, like in detail, we'll see that. So just understand any idea behind the concept. If you have queries, you can ask me. We'll see the hands-on right now. If you don't have any queries, can we all join the second invite? We'll quickly see the hands-on on this and understand the wrapper classes concept better.